Right, hello, welcome back to part 2 of our Pmdg 737 NGXU tutorial. If you saw the last part, you'll know that we have just pushed back from East Midlands and we are fully ready to go, pretty much. The FMC is programmed. If you didn't see the last part and you're coming to this part, then I'd highly recommend you watch the last part to understand how we got here. So, I'm going to unpause P3D, so you'll see we are here with our engines on and the wipers are on because it's a very windy, murky day over in East Midlands. So, we are now going to prepare the aircraft for takeoff, and I'll talk you through what I'm doing as best I can here. I'm going to make sure my screen reader is turned up. Where's NVDA? There we go. Turned up quite a bit, just so that you can hear what's going on throughout the flight. But first we're going to do the before taxi. The flaps and everything are extended from the last part, so go back and, as I say, watch the end of that if you're kind of confused as to what state we're in. Taxi checklist.
Taxi checklist. Generators. On. Proheat. On. Anti-ice.
Set.
Isolation valve.
Auto.
Engine start switches.
Continuous.
Recall.
Checked.
Auto brakes.
RTO.
Flight controls.
Flight controls. Now it's paused because again we need to take action on one of the items, and so we are going to get hold of our joystick and we are going to go full left,
Full left.
full right,
Full right.
full back,
Full back.
full forward,
Full forward.
rudder to the left,
Rudder full left.
and rudder to the right.
Rudder full right.
Checked.
Ground equipment.
Cleared.
Checklist complete.
Right, that checklist is completed, and I do not believe there's any flows attached to that particular checklist. So we're ready now to reposition over to runway 09. So we're going to go to the world menu of P3D, the airport menu of P3D, tab over to the combo box, go to runway 09 and hit enter and let P3D reload itself. So we're going to do the takeoff with the joystick, and I'll show you the best way to do that. You want to aim for about 10 to 15 degrees nose up in the 7.3. Probably about 10 is perfect, but it's very difficult to control sometimes, depending on your joystick configuration. So yeah, about 10 to 15 degrees nose up. FSFO, if you're using the user.cfg provided, will automatically engage LNAV, VNAV, and autopilot for you. And FSFO also should raise the flaps at the correct time, but that's a little bit buggy, so we might end up doing that ourselves. First and foremost though, before takeoff checklist.
Before takeoff checklist. Flaps.
Set.
Stabilization trim.
It's stopping at the trim because we haven't set the trim. As I said in the previous video, the trim often causes me to stall and others, so I would not set your trim. Leave it at 0. Just trust me on this one.
Set.
Checklist complete.
So we're going to just hit control past that item. Alright, so lighting us up like a Christmas tree. Landing lights and everything are set. It's going to probably make an announcement if you have that on. We don't, so it isn't. But we are ready to go. Always check that your window for FSFO is still there, because sometimes it has been known to crash when you do that checklist. The flight attendant announcements also make it freeze up, so that's why we have them turned off. Next thing we're going to do is make sure runway guidance mode is on. Now there is a current bug. I've just actually noticed a mistake of mine. You'll remember in the previous video I set the heading to 269er. That's because I'm so used to going off runway 27 at East Midlands, but the heading, the MCP heading, should actually be 089er here for runway 09. So that's my mistake. That's good I noticed that. Set heading 089.
Heading 89er.
So not a problem, we can change the MCP heading just to make sure that it's lined up. It's not the end of the world if the heading is wrong, since LNAV is going to take us on a pre-programmed routing. But if, for example, ATC suddenly said a fly runway heading, you would be able to just say heading select and you would be in the clear because it would follow the pre-selected heading. So runway guidance is on. I will give you a little tip that for whatever reason currently TFM, when you do Control H to turn on runway guidance. There's also turning on heading select some of the time. So I'd recommend going into Pmdg FMC, going into Pmdg Options, I believe on 4 right, and going to I'll show you. I know we're on the runway, but I'll show you. What I was talking about is going to Pmdg Options here. So menu, Pmdg Options on 4 right. Options. Key commands on 3 left. Auto flight on 1 left. Then you have all these options and you hit on an option. So for example, let's find one here. Command A, so autopilot A is Z or Z. So if I was to hit 5 left and then go and type a new key in the simulator window and then come back to TFM, and I would, don't hit Alt-E for execute, don't hit that because it will change the key that you've set for that specific function. It will change that to Alt-E, so you need a shift tab to exec or execute button and hit enter on that, and it will change the key. So come in here and change your heading select key to something different. I have mine on Control S, because otherwise you're going to keep hearing whenever you do runway guidance heading select on, and you don't want heading select to come on because then you're going to follow a heading and it's a pain. You want LNAV mode, obviously. When we get airborne, LNAV will come on, so change that key. Anyway, back to the legs page so we can see where we are. Next thing we're going to make sure is attitude mode. And you heard it say down 1, so that was right bracket, left bracket with TFM. Turn attitude mode on because I need to know how many degrees we're pitching the nose up. Go into TFM settings and make sure that it's on speech, I would say, for attitude mode. You don't really want to hear the tones. It's more difficult with the tones. I would rather do speech. Some people might want the tones, and by all means go and change it, but we're going to demo it on speech. So that'll tell us, attitude mode will tell us how much pitch up. I'm also going to hit my key that I set in P3D to center all flight controls. Remember we did all those flight control checks and things, just to make sure that they're all centered. I'm going to hit my key, which you can go and set one as well. It's often useful just to make sure that they're centered and you're not going to end up veering off in a different direction when you try and take off. So other than that, we're all prepared. I know that probably seems quite a long time sat on the runway doing that. It isn't. I can do it in about 20 seconds and go if you're on VATSIM and they say, yeah, hurry up. You know, I'm talking through it slowly. So what's going to happen now is we're going to advance the throttles to 50. FSFO should set takeoff power. You'll hear us head down the runway. You'll hear V1 rotate called out. I'm going to pull back on the stick to about 10 to 15 degrees. Get the plane in the air, and then at about 400 feet or so you'll hear FSFO engage LNAV for the lateral route, VNAV for the vertical route, and Command A for the autopilot. VNAV will also control our speed, and you'll hear at 1500 feet the power will come back to the climb thrust setting as well, just because I'm not going to be able to talk through all this whilst I'm doing it. So let's do a demo and go for it, shall we? So parking brakes released and 50%.
Thrust set.
Now sometimes FSFO doesn't set the thrust. We're going to hit Control Shift G and help it out and set it.
29 knots.
Again, something to
Speed
watch
alive.
for.
42
Now
knots.
the thrust is set. Speed is alive.
59 knots.
80 knots.
75 knots.
Check.
91 knots. 105 knots. 119 knots.
V1, rotate.
V1
132
rotate.
knots.
V2,
145 knots. Airborne. 150
positive
knots.
rate.
Gear up.
Landing gear up.
That's ignore runway guidance. And ignore the trim.
VNAV, LNAV, autopilot.
VNAV on. Command A on. LNAV on.
And LNAV, VNAV and Command A on our on. Turn the trim off and runway guidance. So, there we go, and now we can hear we are right 9. Speed's coming up through 160
Acceleration
knots.
altitude.
There's acceleration altitude, so climb power. and it's still up 18, so even VNAV is commanding about 18 degrees nose up, so you can see. We're going to go flaps 1. See, it's not bringing them up. It should do, but it isn't. I'm going to turn attitude mode off. So you have runway guidance. You will drift off maybe by 1 degree or so when you're hand flying. It's obviously very difficult to keep it on exact headings, but that's fine. Flaps up. My flaps are coming all the way up.
Flaps 2.
I think they are.
Flaps 5.
Oh no, okay, I don't want you to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm not sure what's happening
Flaps
there.
10.
I think it thought I said flaps full, and I actually said flaps
Flaps 5.
up. So we'll just hit F5, it's fine.
Flaps 2.
See, the speed is still 230 knots.
Flaps
VNAV is controlling the aircraft and climbing us out. Coming through 4,000 very shortly. There we go. Now flaps are all the way up. I just had to do that myself. Interesting mistake there from FSFO. So yeah, that's how you do a takeoff, pretty much. It went pretty smoothly, I would say. You can see on the legs page, approaching this waypoint, that we're going to be 3,000 or above, and we are. 6.1 miles, and you can keep hitting Alt-R to refresh. You can see this top waypoint is your next waypoint, and we're 5.7 miles away. Right, now, after takeoff checklist.
After takeoff checklist. Engine bleeds.
On.
Packs.
Auto.
Landing gear.
Landing gear switch.
Up and off.
Flaps.
Be all
Up.
the,
No lights.
Checklist complete.
The landing gear has a mechanism by which you pull the gear up, but the switch, or the handle at least, for the landing gear also has to be in the off position fully, to make sure that you know, just to demonstrate to the flight crew that it is definitely up. Right, so you can also hear the wipers have gone off because we're probably past the speed where they are allowed to be on.
Transition altitude.
So it's turned those off. You can
Check.
see we've now passed transition altitude as I specified in the FMC. So we have gone to standard, and yeah, we are now continuing to climb. You can just enjoy the views up to cruising altitude of 10,000 feet. In VNAV, with VNAV controlling the speed and VNAV controlling the altitude. Now in that key commands page that I showed you, there are various keys that you can set for the Pmdg. I'll tell you some of mine. I have a key set for speed, and there you go, N1 light off means that we are coming up to leveling at cruise, and that tone you heard means 1,000 feet to go until leveling out. So here we go, we're leveling out at 10,000 feet, which was our cruise. We can see here, sorry, I'll get back to what I was talking about, but just talk about this right now. You can see with right bracket D, ETA 59 and top of descent is in 21 miles. So that's a useful hotkey to see in TFM where you are. As I say, very short flight. Yeah, so I have some hotkeys set, one of them being altitude intervene. Altitude intervene basically is, and you can see the powers coming in, don't worry, we're not climbing, it's because we're now above 10,000 feet, it's or just about above 10,000 feet, it's speeding up. Altitude intervene is basically
Passing 10,000 feet.
and also, yeah, it's doing that. We're right on the verge of passing 10,000 because we're level at 10,000, so there we go, landing lights off. Altitude intervene is basically where you can set a new altitude. So you remember when we looked at that restriction on the SID that was 6,000 feet. The plane would level out at 6,000 feet VNAV, and it would, you know, force you to be level at 6,000 feet because that's the restriction on the SID. Let's say ATC come on and say, okay, climb to cruise at 350. It's like, well, what do you do? Well, we're stuck on this SID restriction. Well, you press your altitude intervene button, Tremere's Alt-A, and then you would see the aircraft climb to the new altitude, provided you've set it. So, if we're level at 6,000 and we need to change the altitude quickly because ATC have said cancel the restriction, you would say to FSFO, set flight level, you know, 350. Sets the altitude, then you press altitude intervene, and it forcibly gets the aircraft to continue the climb. Same situation on a descent. And we also have a similar concept with speed intervene. So VNav will control the speed and always calculate a speed that it
Approaching top of descent.
believes is correct. If you hit speed intervene and then say, I don't know, speed 200 or 200 in this case you would say to FSFO, it will force VNav to change the speed. And you're going to see me do that on the arrival because I want to take control of my speed. That's what you should do. Now you can see it says approaching top of descent, 6 miles. So what we need to do to give
Watch your airspeed.
VNav, yeah, okay, it's saying that because we're below 10,000 and VNav is trying to slow down to 250 knots. This is a special situation because we've got a cruise of 10,000, so it's very strange. Don't worry about it. We need to reset our MCP altitude down to our initial approach altitude. So, set altitude 3,000.
Altitude 3000.
So you can see we've got a CDU message saying set altitude there because it was saying, hey, I need to descend, set the altitude. So we knew, remember, if you watched part 1, that the altitude we were going to get the ILS at that CF5L, or 5R, sorry, for 5 right, was going to be 3,000. So since we're offline, we just set it to the initial approach altitude. ATC may give us different altitudes, and VATSIM descending is a whole different story. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get on the ground for you, but right now I'm just going to show you how to do this as if you have no ATC. So you can see we haven't quite descended yet. It's going to, I would imagine. Keep an eye on this. It's trying to slow down to 250 knots first because it had sped up all the way to like 300 and something knots.
Passing 10,000 feet.
And landing lights are now going back on. Keeping an eye on this to see when it begins descending. There we go. It's now going down. You'll often find that with VNav that it takes precedence with the speed. It uses vertical speed, the pitch, of course, to control the speed. That's some really nice views. Okay. So, it's descending to get the ILS. Hopefully FSFO is going to set the ILS frequency. It should do. We will keep an eye. Descend checklist.
Descent checklist.
Get it to do this.
Pressurization.
Set.
Recall.
Checked.
Auto brakes.
Set.
Landing data.
Checked.
Altimeters.
Runway heading
Checked.
Approach
CDU
briefing.
display.
Completed.
So it's doing the checklist. It's set the correct ILS path. Now you just heard a CDU message say day path unachievable, DES, descent path unachievable. Often you'll get that if you're a little bit high, for example, which we were because it took a while to slow it down. The main thing to note is that it will often appear and disappear quickly, so it's not a major concern. Just keep an eye, and so we've got 18 miles to get to 3,000, and we're currently at 8, so I know in my mind that's easily achievable. Now we need to calculate or find what the calculated final approach speed is going to be, so we're going to go back to this init ref page, which will have changed now to a view where we can see the flap landing speeds. So, we have one for 15 degrees and 30 degrees, and then we can see the runway, and 40 degrees as well. You can see the runway length, that it's picked up the runway we're going to land on. We're going to go for flaps 30, so 30 degrees, 143 kT, so 143 knots is going to be our final approach speed. So that's essentially what they call the VREF speeds. Right.
Transition altitude.
Okay, I tried to go to the legs page. You'll notice when FSFO is doing an action, like changing the altimeter as it was there, it locks up your keyboard. And that is normal. But it's unfortunate. Now, glide slope is alive. The TFM and FSFO just announced that. Ignore that. That's telling you it's alive, but as I've said to many people, the fact that it's alive does not mean you go to approach mode. It just means you've picked it up. You go to approach mode when you're approaching your localizer waypoint. So here it's very obvious. CF05R is the localizer. FF is where we should pick up the glide slope. In the US, you often have different waypoint names that don't indicate so easily as to what your localizer waypoint is. There's nothing wrong, I will say, with having approach mode on early. If you're coming through, you know, like 4,000 or whatever, and you decide, hey, I don't know exactly where the localizer and glide are, I'm just going to throw in approach mode, go ahead, it's fine. It won't do anything bad. So 8 miles, coming through 5,200, so we are going to be at 3,000. You can see speed still 244, so we're going to do the speed intervene thing here, hit my speed intervene key that I mapped, and then ask FSFO. Oops. Set speed 220.
Speed 220.
Which is set, and you'll notice here it's going to start bringing the vertical speed up because it can't slow down if we're descending that much. I need us to keep descending, so I'm going to throw out some speed brake, which will help VNAV continue the descent. This is where Tramp gets it wrong and the Pmdg gets it right, because in the real aircraft, speed and pitch are tied, they're not separate, of course. Right, now we're descending properly. Coming through 4,000 feet. I'm 4 miles out. So, we're going to continue reducing the speed because we're 4 miles out from the localizer. Set speed 180.
Speed 180.
Flaps 5.
Flaps 1.
Okay, we are slowing down relatively nicely, and we are going to stow the speed brake, and we're going to throw in
Flaps
approach
2.
mode,
Approach hold on.
because we are
99% left.
approaching the
Flaps 5.
localizer.
99% left.
And you heard now
LNAV off.
Down 8%.
LNAV is off because we have just
Down
picked
17%.
up
99% left.
the localizer,
Down 24%.
and you can
99%
see
left.
we're making a turn, which is why we're
30%.
getting
99%
down
left.
30, down whatever. The glide
37%.
is getting away.
99% left. Down 44%. 99% left.
That's because we're still turning,
Down 50%. 99%
so don't
left.
worry about that. It will come in.
Down 56%. 76% left.
But we're going to level here
Down
at
61%.
3,000 feet
31%
and 180
Down
knots.
65%. 1% left. Down 66%. 57% right.
The
Down
localizer
66%.
has us, and it's going to turn
Down
us.
66%. Down
So we can
64%.
pretty much ignore.
Down 61%.
There we go. You see, look, down 61. Now it's making
Down
the turn.
57%.
We're coming in on that.
Down
So you
53%.
heard LNAV go off. That's what FSFO says.
Down
LNAV
48%.
off when you pick up the localizer, which is
Down
how I
42%.
know we have the localizer. And all we did
Down
was
56%.
Control A for approach hold. In a second, VNAV
49%.
will go off. You're going to hear it. VNAV
Approach hold
off.
off. VNAV off.
There you go. And approach off. Don't worry about that. That means we have the glide slope. And now we're going to begin descending with the glide slope. We have the loc and the glide. There we go. So, set speed 160.
Speed 160.
Flaps 15. Gear down.
Flaps 10. Landing gear down. Flaps 15.
Descending with the glide. And now we're going to go. Set speed 143.
Speed 143.
Flaps 30.
Flaps 25.
Command B.
Command B on.
So,
Command A off.
this is going to be an interesting one then.
Flaps 30.
So, what happened there? We did flaps 30, which is our final flaps. We did final approach speed. And we are on the glide slope descending.
down.
And ignore FSFO saying gear down. It tries to double check the gears down at 2,000 feet, which it already is. Now we tried to do Command B. You need both Command A and Command B, both autopilots in to do an auto land. Now sometimes, for whatever reason, the ILS I guess is not a high enough category, or I don't understand it myself. Command A and B will not engage and you can only land with one, which means it will not do an auto land and the AP will cut out at the 100 feet mark over the runway, which is fine. You can leave the aircraft to just drift down to the runway as long as you take out the auto throttle and idle the power. So we'll see what we can do. Landing checklist. Landing checklist.
Landing checklist.
See, we need to do the landing checklist now.
Engine start switches.
Continuous.
Landing gear.
And there's a flow
Down.
attached.
Flaps.
Set.
Flaps and everything is set. It's going to make
Speed
sure
brake armed.
speed brake is armed. Perfect. So everything is set, other than the fact that we have this command problem. Let's just see. Command A,
Command A on. Command B off.
Command B,
Command B on. Command A off.
Command A.
Command A on. Command B off.
Okay, so what I'm trying to do, or what I was trying to do, is get both autopilots on at the same time. That's what you need for a full auto land. For whatever reason, this ILS clearly does not support it, because it is not allowing me to do it. So don't be concerned, this may happen to you. It's happened to me before and others with the PMDG. So all we're going to do is let the aircraft go down to 100. The autopilot's going to cut out. We're not going to panic. We're going to leave it on course. And we're just going to idle the power, take out auto throttle and idle the power at about 20 feet and we'll touch down. Might be a bit of a firm landing since it's not an auto land, but it will be a landing of sorts and we will be absolutely fine. Now normally you would say Command B and it would just say Command B on and you would be set to go. You would have Autopilot 1 and Autopilot 2
Minimums.
on. Continue. And you'd be fine, but in this case for whatever reason it's not working. So here we go, we're probably going to lose the autopilot, maybe, relatively
Command
soon.
A off.
There we go, Command A's gone, don't worry, it's fine.
50, 30, 20.
On ground.
Idle power,
Reverse
touchdown.
thrust.
138 knots.
Reverse thrust,
128 knots.
auto
150
brakes
knots.
are doing their thing, that was a little bit firm, I idled the
100
power a
knots.
little bit too late, but we're down, it's
92 knots.
fine.
80 knots.
81 knots. 70 knots.
60 knots.
60
Reverse
knots,
idle.
reverses idle.
Manual braking.
Manual braking, I'm
45
pressing
knots.
the brake key on my joystick till the aircraft
18
comes
knots.
to a complete stop. And there we go, touchdown. Let's see, that landing, yeah, negative 665. I think I needed to idle the power a little bit earlier. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you don't get an auto land in the PMDG or in any aircraft really, because you are literally just you know, like dropping onto the runway. You heard the power. I think I took the power out and idled it about 10 feet. I probably needed to do it a little bit earlier. But FSFO is now cleaning up the aircraft and bringing the flaps in. So normally, in theory, you would get both autopilots on, as I say, and you would end up with a nice soft landing because the plane would not take out the autopilot at 100 feet. It would leave it in and all the way until the rollout, until you're rolling down the runway, it would control the plane for you and get a nice smooth touchdown of maybe negative 100 to negative 300 FPM. In this case it didn't happen, unfortunately, for whatever reason. Sometimes it might be the ILS itself. I think there can be situations where Command B will not engage because you've done it too late. It's a little bit picky, but as you can see, we are on runway 05R, so we're on the runway, just a firm landing, which is probably partly my bad. I could have also pulled back on the stick, to be honest with you, to flare the aircraft. You just have to be very careful. You don't want to overdo it and end up floating back into the air. So that would be, you know, not the greatest landing in the world, but it's fine. So what's happened is the APU has now been turned on by FSFO and the flaps have been brought into 0 automatically as part of the after landing flow. So we're now ready to reposition over to a stand here. Go to the world menu, EGCC. And let's just put it over to gate 1. It really makes no difference for us in this demo. So yeah, very unfortunate that we didn't get a perfect ILS auto land for you on that demo, but be aware that the Command A not engaging with Command B both of them side by side. That could happen to you, and it's important not to panic. You could go around and try again, maybe. That is something we could have done, but I suspect it may well just be an issue with that specific ILS. There are issues with some ILSs where you just, no matter how many times you land on the ILS of that runway, the auto land function will not work for whatever reason. So now we're on stand, and what we're going to do is set the parking brake, and when we do, FSFO will begin the shutdown flow. So ignition 1 and ignition 2 are going. It's going to switch over, well, it's going to throw all the systems out for a second, and then it's going to switch the power over from engines over to the APU. Here we go, you can hear everything powered off for a second. Now it's powered back on because we're on the APU power. Seatbelt sign's gone off, etc. Beacon light off, navigation lights are off. Perfect. And we are on APU power, as you can hear. Engines there, still clunking away as they cool down. Really nice feature that you get that in the PMDG. So with regards to FSFO, we're done. What you can do, if you wish now, is go to the panels dialog of TFM. I'm just going to show you how to get this off APU and now back on a ground power, so you're kind of in a really good turnaround state. You can hit left bracket control P, go to electrical, and you can have this open. I just want to show you the panels before I actually show you how to get over to ground power. So you've got all these panels here. The MCP, for example, is a very good one because all these fields here, speed intervened button, altitude, all of these you can set yourself, type in here and hit enter, just as though you were using FSFO for speech, just as a note. Okay? But anyway, we need those panels, and we also need the FMC, and we're going to go to the menu. We're going to go to FS Actions on 5 right, and we're going to go to Services on 1 right, and we're going to go to 6 right and set the wheel chocks. 6 right. No. That had something still in the scratch pad, that's my bad. 6 right, there we go. If you have something in the scratch pad and you try and hit on a soft key, it tries to put that in, you know, what you had typed in or whatever waypoint you had selected, tries to move it to that soft key. So it was trying to move the waypoint TNT there to the wheel chocks line select, which is obviously not going to work. So wheel chocks are now set. We're going to request ground power with soft key 2 left. And you'll hear in a minute it'll say ground power available. There we go. Back to the panels. Shift that over here. Electrical. And we're going to go to ground power on. And we are now on ground power, not APU. APU generator 1 off. APU generator 2 off. Tab then to see all of these things. Shut down APU. And the APU generator buses are going off. And we can get rid of the panels, and we are now on ground power, and the APU is still on, but it's momentarily going to shut down in about 30 seconds. So yeah, we're now on ground power, and this is a good turnaround state, so if I wanted to fly this aircraft back, I could. So let's kind of debrief. That was a very nice flight. You got to see a perfect intercept of the ILS, approach mode on about 4 or 5 miles out from the first localizer waypoint, and then LNAV went off, and then eventually VNAV went off as we turned towards the runway. And as I say, for whatever reason, Command B wouldn't go on. That's happened at various airports to various people. And And we have to remember that it is very unlikely that a pilot would do an auto land. They maybe do one every 6 months in real life or something like that. It's really only for bad weather. So there may well be some runways where it just doesn't work, or some situations where you say command B a little bit too late in the approach stage for whatever reason and it doesn't come on. It's an interesting one. And in that case, manual landing is something that we have to practice when the autopilot cuts out at 100 feet. As I say, I idled the power a little bit too late, and I could have pulled back on the stick, and I need to practice that and see how much we can pull back, because I don't want to pull back too much. Either way, we got it down, and you know, it certainly wasn't a crash, but it was a bit of a quite a firm landing. What I will talk about in this is some other modes of the aircraft. So you saw me use LNAV and VNAV, which are the main modes, and you heard me talk about what you would do if ATC asked you to fly a vector. You would say heading select, and then you would set the heading. If it's runway heading, you've already done that on the MCP before you took off. If it is a different heading, then you would ask FSFO to do the heading for you, or type it into TFM indeed. There are other modes though for altitude. VNAV is obviously for the pre-programmed and calculated path that we talked about. The other modes are flight level change mode. Flight level change mode is where you would go to essentially set a speed and have it control the vertical pitch based on the speed. So VNAV has the speed intervene function. You saw me use that. You can intervene on the speed and force VNAV to maintain a speed. Flight level change, however, is what you would use if ATC tell you to descend and they're vectoring you, for example. If you're being vectored, the plane cannot follow a pre-programmed VNAV path, or LNAV of course, because you're not on a pre-programmed route, you're being vectored. In this case, you would say to FSFO flight level change mode, and you would give it the altitude to descend to. Flight level change mode is very useful because it maintains a speed. So if I was to say, okay, we're at 10,000, descend to 3,000, or set altitude 3,000, flight level change mode, it would begin descending. And then if I were to say, you know, speed 220, flight level change mode will then vary the pitch of the aircraft to maintain 220. If it needs to slow down, it will raise the nose quite a bit and your vertical speed will be very shallow descent. If it needs to speed up, it will increase the descent rate quite significantly. And you can kind of play the flight level change game by, you know, if for example it's bringing the nose up too much for your liking and you think, yeah, I can see it's trying to slow down, but I also need to descend, then you can extend the speed brakes, and that will really help. I mean, if you ever need to descend quickly, if the controller says you're high, all you need to do is put in flight level change mode and extend the speed brake to full, and you can get descent rates in excess of probably 4,000 or 5,000 feet per minute. So that's that mode. The final mode for altitude that I'll discuss is called vertical speed mode, which is very simple. You set your altitude and you say to FSFO, set vertical speed, you know, 1500. You don't have to say negative. It'll pick up whether you need to climb or descend based on the prior altitude you set. And that is obviously just a vertical speed. So that is the most manual mode there is. Can be useful, but rarely. There are other pages in the FMC that I didn't show you because we didn't really have time. There's the cruise page, CRZ button in TFM, where you can see your current cruising altitude and speed. So if you need to change your cruise max speed, then you would go to the cruise page and you would enter, for example, you're at 0.78, the controller says speed up 0.80, you go CRZ page, you type in 0.80 and you enter it, I believe, in might be one left. Let me go and check that for you right now. I can show you exactly what you would do while we're here. CRZ. And oh, we're just going to have FSFO's or something's freezing the keyboard. Hold on 1 second. So econ target speed, so it's actually 2 left, and you would enter your 0.80 and you would hit 2 left, execute, and you would speed up at cruise. You have other options in here. Engine out, which is on 5 right. If you had an engine out at cruise, then you could hit this. You'll also often see an option here called econ. So if you're maintaining a specific speed from the controller, and then the controller says, okay, you can resume your own free speed, or resume normal speed is what they would say. You would come in here and press on econ, which is usually 5 left, and that would then return the aircraft to how it was operating for us, because there was no speed restrictions. It just calculates the most economical speed. So that's how you would select a speed at cruise and how you would revert back to normal econ speed. This cruise page, if you go up one with page up, takes you, normally it's not doing it right now, but will take you to other pages. For example, I'll show you here. You've got the CLB button, climb page. In here you can look at your climb, you can change your climb speed if you really want to, from you know, whatever the aircraft calculates is most economical. You've got your depart button here. These are all the buttons that had hotkeys that I was showing you. The depart button actually has a bug. It says Alt plus D. It's not, it's Alt plus A. Hold page. This is where you would go to do a holding, but again, that's very advanced stuff. I'm not going to go into that right now. Progress page. That's what I had showed you with Alt P, where you can see how much fuel you'll have at your destination and what time you'll arrive there. Your execute button, that's the Alt E one. N1 limit, that was to do with takeoff that we went through, where we did the takeoff 1 and climb 1, etc. Fix page, previous page, next page. None of those are really of any interest right now. The previous and next page are just what you do with page up and page down. And the descent page, which I already showed you, the Alt plus D takes you to the descent page. Again, on that descent page you can do your descent forecast for the winds, and you can also change your descent speed if you wanted to. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. It's a very advanced aircraft, but that's how you would fly it from A to B. As I say, unfortunately we didn't get the nice ILS auto land that I was hoping to show you. If you watch my previous videos in the PMDG, there's one in the 777 at this moment in time, there's one in the 737 going into East Midlands. You will see a successful auto land and how smooth it is. That one was a little bit rough because of the Command B problem, but nevertheless it was a survivable landing, we'll say. And of course the FMC with its functionality makes online flying a lot more successful. The 747 and 777 are something I'll cover in a future video. They are more complex in some ways, and you know, easier in others. They are slightly different, but I would generally say if you learn the 737 well, then you will be able to jump into the 74 and the triple with relative ease. Maybe, you know, a couple of flights to get yourself familiarized, and then you'll be ready to continue on flying with the familiarity you've got in the 73. Again, I hope this has been useful and you've been able to complete a flight from A to B. Post any questions, make notes from this video. It's very important with FSFO that you follow the checklists as I did, because they all, most of them anyway, have flows attached. So I'll remind you the order again. Open the doors and it will do the flow, and then it will head out for the walk around. You program the CDU, you close the doors when you're ready to go, and you do the pre-flight checklist. Once it's done that, it's going to power up the APU, etc., switch you to APU power. Before start checklist, then you can push back. Then you start your engines, taxi checklist when you're ready to go. Over to the runway, before takeoff checklist. After takeoff checklist, then when you're on descent checklist, of course, and then landing checklist. And then once you've touched down, everything's pretty automated. It will do all the stuff for you, and then when you set the parking brake, it will shut the engines off and switch you to APU power, etc. So those are the checklists. It's very important because I know people will say, oh, you know, the aircraft's not working, it's giving me a warning. It's probably most likely because you didn't do a checklist in the right order and it didn't turn on or change a system that needed changing. It's also very important that you kind of maybe, even if you just go through this flight plan that I did and go through programming the FMC, getting everything set up for takeoff. There's a lot to program, and we did the very basics there. You could, you know, go through and check a lot more things, do probably even more thorough briefings than we did, but that's how you would get the FMC prepared to a state where it is where it is able, where you're able to take off and that you will follow a route. You see, there's a lot more fuel and payload and all that information that you need. So, as I say, I hope this was helpful. We're now in a state in terms of the aircraft, as you can see, where the APU is off, just the fuel pumps, some of them are still on, and we are on ground power. So, I hope you enjoyed, and it was useful, and we will see you in the next tutorial.